Robert Fox is defense editor at London Evening Standard. Welcome to our program, Mr. Fox.
Hello, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, and we will begin with the latest news from Politico. According to Politico, Vladimir Putin is the biggest loser of the 2024 because he lost his footprint, his footnote in Syria. He failed to help Bashar al-Assad to stay in power, and also he has failed to achieve all his military objectives in so-called special military operation. What is your reaction to this?
Well, let's start with what you've just said. Did he really think this war was going to go on for 3 years and more? Quite clearly he didn't. We know the way that the Russian forces were prepared, including uniforms for the victory parade within 10 days. So something has gone really wrong. And I think he finds it very difficult, and we're talking about Putin himself now, to reconcile the fact of failure. And I think the fact is that he is not a success will color his relationship with Trump. And I don't think it's going to be as easy as Vladimir Putin might have imagined 6 months ago. Now, as to the situation, I agree with you. He is relying on heavy crude armaments and heavy crude numbers, which is putting Ukrainian forces along the front under pressure. But what lies behind this, I think, is going to be so interesting, because we're just only now beginning to see in Moscow, in the direction of the economy, in the way the Kremlin is operating, some slight signs of panic.
How do you see the main indicators of this panic in Russia, in Moscow, in Kremlin?
Well, I think it relies basically on one person, and it isn't Vladimir Putin. It relies on Elvira Nabiullina, the governor of the central bank, because then the way you look at the figures, frankly, they don't look good. They have got inflation, which is steadily rising. It is about to could move very soon into double digits. We have bank rate at between 21. It's been difficult to discern really how much it is. It's minimum 21, but it could be as high as 23%. And the sanctions are biting because of the increased activity, the evidence of the activity, which is a whole subject which we must discuss, of the shadow fleets and their behavior. What I'd like to add in this, in that, you know, the economy is under pressure and will show, unless they can find some magic solution, it will be showing real pressure by the summer. There are all kinds of reasons. There are demographic pressures. There is employment. There is the question of the armaments industry themselves. And frankly, what we have to see, in view of what you've said about Syria, with which I agree, failing allies. So we have to watch that. But meanwhile, it's a big resilience question, because Russia, I fear, in the next 2 or 3 months is really going to try and knock Ukraine out by doing what it always does, which is attacking civilian populations.
From your perspective, how does this failures of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin can shape his relations with Donald Trump?
I think it's going to be very difficult, because the Trump has always, in the past anyway, seen Putin, I was about to say, as a kindred spirit, but from somebody I know well who has seen them both together, is that, you know, they're two narcissists together, and they think that they're big leaders. And the great thing about Trump-Putin is that each thinks he is smarter than the other. And I think that's going to be the very difficult proposition. Let's look at Trump. Trump likes deals. He's a transactional leader, if you could put it like that. He likes fixing things, doing things. The book that was ghosted for him is The Art of the Deal. Matching that, you have to be well aware is that Trump does not like long entanglements. He doesn't like big wars. He doesn't like long ones. And he's got two really difficult ones on his hands, which he will try to disentangle himself from. One in Europe, which is Ukraine. And the other is the increasing demands from Netanyahu, another very difficult ally, in that Trump will, I think, resent the amount of money and arms that he is having to put into Israel. But coming back to Ukraine, which is what we're discussing, is that I think that what Trump will try to do, and I think it's pretty clear from what his envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, has said already, there is no quick deal on the cards, because Putin stays in power. He's kept there by a war and a war machine, and he doesn't really want to wind that down soon. That is going to mean some kind of rethink by Trump, but he will put more responsibility on the Western Europeans. And by the Western Europeans, I include the UK, and they're looking very weak at the moment.
Do you expect Russia and Vladimir Putin to try to slow down negotiations between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine, try to block this process, just to do it more slowly, to buy more time for Russia to achieve its goals?
I think so. I think that they will try delaying tactics. They will have sort of a lot of Friday surprises. And I think that we have real problems now with quite clearly what is a hybrid war now with Western Europe. And it primarily does involve Western Europe because, of course, I'm meaning the sea lines of communication, particularly gas and oil pipelines under the ocean, and above all, communication cable, of which we've just had too many cases of this going on. And we have the example now with Finland taking into custody, in other words, arresting the crew and tanker of Eagle S. And there seems to be a lot more to come out of that, because the Eagle S wasn't just any old tanker, very much part of the dark fleet, of the shadow fleet, very important to Russia now to try and get its exports out, its oil exports particularly, but also like on previous occasions with the Chinese ship arrested by the Danes and then let go, dragging its anchor, cutting cables. But Eagle S is different because it seems to have been equipped for the business of war, for tracking, surveillance, highly sophisticated interference with traffic with NATO maritime military forces. And I think that NATO, European NATO particularly, is really going to have to step up, particularly with regard to the Baltic. But of course, Putin being Putin won't leave it there, will try and spread it further, and I think cause a lot of trouble in the Arctic as well.
Do you see this incidents with cables in the sea as an act of war by Russia?
Well, it's part of this phase that we're in, and it's very, very important to flag it up. I think, for our viewers and for you, I think you cannot believe how hard it is for the Western Europeans, particularly the Brits, to understand that any idea that was launched in 1989, James Baker III made a great speech, the Secretary of State in Berlin, saluting the arrival of the peace dividend era. The peace dividend era never really happened, but it was thought that history had come to an end, or to a pause, to use the phraseology of the famous book that came out in 1992, following very much in this spirit by Francis Fukuyama, The End of History and the Last Man, that liberal Western democracy, mixed economies, free enterprise economies would prevail. That is well and truly over. So now we're into a period of no war, no peace. And warfare is going to come not just from the barrel of a gun, a tank, or a rocket. It's going to come in very different forms. And that is what Putin is doing. And we have to also watch what the triangle of Russia, China, and North Korea Iran is less and less in the picture, but I suppose it will be the fourth to make up a quartet, are trying to do. It's no war, no peace, but it is confrontation. If it's confrontation and breaking the laws of the UN Charter and of human rights and the conduct of war, which they're doing quite conspicuously, then we're in a period of war. And I think we've got to get used to it. Western Europe finds it very, very difficult indeed. And you will see that acutely in the election campaign in Germany.
I would like also to get back to the topic about negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that Kremlin would not support banning Ukraine from joining NATO for 20 years and deploying European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. At the same time, Vladimir Putin said that he would be open for ending the war in Ukraine. Do you expect these negotiations about a ceasefire in Ukraine to succeed at any kind of stage in the future? Do you expect any kind of success in any time?
But a long way off, yes. In the short term, no. Because I think you're absolutely right to point to the Lavrov speech, the latest Lavrov statement, in saying that, that they won't even accept a discussion of a pause of Ukraine joining NATO, a pause for 20 years, and on the borders that you have some peacekeeping force manned by European forces, which is under active discussion, as we all know, much to the reluctance and horror of the British, less so to the French, because the British and the French are quite likely to have to frame it and lead this operation. Lavrov, though, is curious, isn't he? Lavrov is the big mouth, but he's not the biggest mouth. The big mouth is Medvedev, the deputy, the former prime minister and president, who goes off talking about almost in apocalyptic terms of things not happening, or what they might do, or what they might not do. Lavrov and Medvedev are deployed as part of psychological warfare. They do not reveal necessarily the inner thinking of Putin, which raises a question. Who is helping Putin with his thinking? I think this is a very, very difficult one to get to the bottom of. It's obviously a part of the security, the securitocracy of the National Security Council, well-known figures there, those in charge of the FSB, the GRU, the internal services, the mayors of Moscow and Petersburg, and the Patrusha father and son, two very, very important figures. But it's now looking as if we are in a new phase. He's been in power for 25 years, a new phase of Putinism and Putin rule. He wants to claim absolute rule, but it's flaking on the fringes. It's like an old carpet that's beginning to come apart at the edges, simply because you could say, I can look at this because I'm even older than Vladimir Putin. He's trying to do too much in too many different directions with very scarce resources, or scarcer resources, could I say it? Let's be sensible about this, scarcer resources than he would like us to think that he has. And the real sign of that we've seen, as you rightly say, is this month, as we're still in December, what has happened in Syria. He could not really do anything to save Assad and the Assad regime. Russia did a bit of sporadic bombing to stop HDS in their march south from Idlib, but it wasn't serious. It wasn't much. And then within days, they were trying to ship out kit from Hmeimim, the main air base, and I suspect it was the more sensitive guidance materials with the S-400 air defense batteries.
From your perspective, what could cause the collapse of Putin's regime, and what kind of fractions inside Kremlin, what kind of people could threaten Vladimir Putin personally?
We just don't know enough. We know that he has become more and more security conscious for his own security. There are numerous stories, deeply researched by my colleague Luke Harding of The Guardian, of doubles and so on. But we do know he moves around. He is heavily protected. He is personally extremely sensitive, as we saw throughout COVID, these extraordinary figures, which really look rather crazy. I don't know whether they thought that was the way that most audiences would react. Of those enormously long tables and him at one end and the other, it was something like a very good Hollywood comedy, say, like the Marx Brothers, you know, or Charlie Chaplin doing The Great Dictator. I mean, he looks almost like a comic figure when he's doing that. And I think that he will put on great personality displays like the 4-5 hour news conference, but with greater and greater difficulty. Now, to be blunt, to get to the heart of the thing, it is when Moscow and Petersburg really feel the pinch, when they don't like what's going on, when there are more drone attacks, possibly, but also when there are too many body bags coming home. It's amazing how they've managed to really deflect that up to now. And by my calculation, they're coming up. If they go on at this rate, by March, they will have had over 1 million dead and very seriously injured, to the extent that they're taken out of the battlefield. They're not military competent. You could refer back to the Great Patriotic Wars of 1941 to 45, and also the experience, which was brutal, of the Russian adventure in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. And these things do have their impact, but it's very difficult, from my perspective, to calculate where the tipping point is going to come. But I'm pretty sure you're right in suggesting that it will and can, or it could very well come somewhere. And I think it may well come in 2025.
And from your perspective, what could what could cause even faster crumble of the Russian regime next year, and what kind of factors could play the most significant role in that?
I think it's a combination. I think if the economy continues to go sour, because Russia can't trade. That's the real story. That's why we have the desperation of these ships, these shadow ships, and this fleet that they're trying to put to sea. They've lost 4 or 5 already. 3 have broken up. And the most interesting one, in a way, was the Ursa, which in the Eastern Mediterranean, where there was an explosion, allegedly, in the engine room, that was carrying 2 vital cranes and other equipment for the Vladivostok dockyard to build the nuclear icebreakers. And as we know, Putin always harps on, when he's giving his vision of Russia in the world, the Arctic is very, very important. And they are claiming more and more of it, the bays and the inlets, as Russian territorial water, which is going to be very, very difficult to reconcile with China. And I think that's going to be a problem. So I think something could go wrong on the battlefield. Something catastrophic could happen if there's a breakthrough. If people, as I said, in Western Russia feel really vulnerable. But I also think that if things go on like this, and for instance, that there will be a call up, and I suspect it's imminent, of more North Korean troops, I think the Chinese are going to get pretty fed up with this. That Xi Jinping and his inner court of about his committee of about 7 people will really worry about what the cost of this is to China, but particularly how much it damages what they're trying to do to establish their global leadership across the South Pacific. There are lots of parts moving in this. And the interesting thing is, less and less does Putin seem to be in charge of what he's doing. He's doing too much. He's trying to destabilize Moldova. He's trying to destabilize quite successfully up to this point Georgia. He's annoying Azerbaijan with this ludicrous claim and counterclaim and half apology for downing the Embraer aircraft from Azerbaijan over Grozny, which sends a message to would-be allies of the Astana group. He's messing around in the Balkans. Now, if this continues, if it makes produces more difficulties for Europe, that will not please Trump. Because Trump he really means it, wants Europe to take on more of its own defense and security for reasons which are quite understandable. If, frankly, Putin is just going to be a damn nuisance to all this, inconsistent, I think that Trump will abandon him. The only card in diplomacy, I think the main card that Putin can play is if he can get some scheme for negotiation going through Elon Musk. But Musk, I think, is on borrowed time. He's being too successful. And it's the battle of two extremely vain men. And I don't think that a narcissistic personality like Donald Trump can stick with this man inventing himself as almost the alternate president of the United States. But through Musk, there is a real chance, I think, of getting through to Moscow. But whether Putin will go along with these terms, because once the war stops, very likely he could stop as the new czar of the new Russia.
I would like also to cover with you North Korean topic. Over 3,000 North Korean soldiers have already been killed or wounded in Ukraine, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Do you feel that such high casualties could force Kim Jong-un to recalculate his position, his policy on helping Russia?
I don't think much is going to make him change his mind, because I think that he thinks he's onto a winner there. He could afford to lose 100,000 men. This is the calculation, and he may well offer up to 100,000 men. But I think it spells danger for him. He sees the advantage of having this new ally, Russia, so he can break out of the encirclement. Again, this must be quite worrying for China, but he gets oil, possibly food, and he gets a sharing technology, particularly in missiles, hypersonic missiles, and in satellites, which he's very keen on, as well as developing the nuclear arms industry. So as far as Kim Jong-un is concerned, it's win-win. But the danger is if this gets through to his people, because the more North Koreans that go outside, the more a sufficient number is likely to return. And it could put pressure, and there is a scenario, and Western intelligence is looking at this very, very carefully, that there could be a breakout through the tri-point, where North Korea, this extraordinary point where North Korea, China, and Russia meet, and these desperate people could go north. We know that there's quite a leak from China, from the outer western reaches of China into Russia as the tundra melts. Desperate farmers go and try and recover land there. And that's in the tens of thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands now. It could be very volatile indeed. What I also fear while we're doing North Korea, if you look at, and they're really terribly important, if it's 26 years after the no, it wasn't. It was more than that. After the Baker speech on the peace dividend, after the launch of the Oreshnik missile on Dnipro, Putin makes two very public statements very quickly. He goes on television and he makes a statement at the meeting, I think, of the CSTO. I don't know whether it was in Astana. It was somewhere. Anyway, in one of the CSTO capitals, in which he says, the way things are going, the strikes by, which is why Oreshnik was launched allegedly, but the strikes by Storm Shadow and ATAC arms means that they're threatening a wider war, not only in Europe, but in Asia. And this leads to the fears of South Korean intelligence that Kim Jong-un could launch an attack across the demarcation line. In other words, the frozen war since 1953 in Korea could start again. Again, another complexity. And at that time, you may recall, this is last month, November, they published the terms of the mutual defense treaty agreed by Kim Jong-un and Putin. And Clause 4 was a mirror of the NATO Article 5, mutual defense. If we're attacked, we are bound to come to the help of another. That would be another commitment which Russia would find very, very difficult to meet.
Let's cover also the recent incident with Azerbaijani Airlines plane. This plane has been shot down by the Russia's air defense systems, according to Reuters and the government of Azerbaijan. Also, Vladimir Putin for the first time has apologized for this incident. However, he has not admitted his responsibility of his army. How do you see this apology from Vladimir Putin?
Well, he didn't. What is so interesting is that he didn't deny somehow it had got something to do with Russia. People know, you can see by satellites. And in fact, there's quite, I think there's quite a sinister side to this. And the sinister side is this. The aircraft, as far as we understand, and you say that from 4 or 5 sources Reuters was using, was saying that it was struck as it approached Grozny. And it's pretty clear what it was. It was a Pantsir missile system, which is the close inner defense, usually for an S-300 or an S-400 system. And then there was a claim that the Grozny area was under drone attack from Ukraine. And this is a big aircraft. It's an Embraer 190, and it should be, on its profile, very easy to detect the difference between that and a drone. But so it couldn't. And then what they did was they appeared to have panicked because the air traffic controllers then sent the aircraft, which knew something had happened, to Dagestan to make a landing there, but it couldn't. And then sent it right across, nearly 100 kilometers, right across the Caspian Sea to Aktua, the airbase, the airfield rather, in Kazakhstan. And in the process, and I think this is the really worrying thing, and it's pointed to the future, it jammed or turned off or cut off GPS guidance to the aircraft. So they were hoping. I wonder, I mean, I have a really cynical, horrible thought that they hoped the whole thing would crash into the Caspian Sea, and so nobody would find out about what really went on. But this tells you about transparency. It tells you that despite the huge effort, and by the way, there is a colossal effort across the region in Russian information and disinformation campaign. I was on Sky News Arabia, a known channel for Moscow output yesterday. They were absolutely clear that I gave them the story that they'd picked up from Reuters that this had happened. This has been a very bad loss for Russian credibility. Let's put it like that, because I think it's really worried allies, very close allies, clients, but allies like Azerbaijan, clients like Kazakhstan. And I think that's the importance. But you can't go beyond that. It's not a change in the world, but it's a change in the weather. It's a change in the climate of the way people see their security and future.
Also, the president of the Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, urged Vladimir Putin and also demanded Russia to pay compensations for victims of this tragedy, to punish the responsible officers who shot down this plane, and also to admit the responsibility of the Russian side. Do you expect Russia to fulfill these Azerbaijani demands, to punish responsible officers, to admit they're guilty, to admit their responsibility, and also to pay compensations for victims of this tragedy?
It depends how much they value the alliance of Azerbaijan. If they value it, they won't admit responsibility, but they will pay compensation. And they will pay compensation without announcing it. Azerbaijan is vital in that what we're looking at now is a very, very complicated situation between Azerbaijan, Russia, and Iran, and where the Azeri connection with Iran is very much worrying Russia and Russia's grip on the Caucasus, particularly the lower Caucasus. So I think that this is a very complicated one, and Russia will continue, as we have seen, to stir things in Georgia, in Ossetia, and indeed the Nagorno-Karabakh standoff conflict, which is far from over. But there's another thing. If Russia isn't transparent about this, think of what that Azerbaijan Airways aircraft was doing. It was on a routine flight from Baku to Grozny. Does this mean to say, in an area where there is a lot of drone activity and effective drone activity from Kiev, it means that almost any commercial airline traffic across that region is vulnerable? We know the airspace is closed from time to time. In fact, there was a closure in and around that time. And the alarm was slightly sounded by one of Putin's personal key allies in Ramzan Kadyrov, who offered his condolences immediately. He seemed to know exactly what had happened. So it is a very important question of trust. That's what I would agree. And trust is the thing that is going to be so difficult for Putin. Putin, with this sort of great dream of Russia being the great Euro-Asian power, he will become more and more dependent on China, above all, China completely. And he is losing very badly to China in an area where he wanted to make substantial gains, namely Africa and to an extent South America and parts of Asia, Southern Asia. But it's really Africa where there's the real real confrontation of interest. And I think this points to what I've been saying consistently, is that Russia now has to follow China. And if the worst comes to the worst, that Russia could just become a client of China, but that won't necessarily please the regime of Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, for your time and for your support for Ukraine. It was a big pleasure to speak with you today, and glory to Ukraine.